welcome to my week at the club. I am now currently, we're in about our 7th week of lockdown for the coronavirus pandemic. I hope everybody's doing okay in their houses. It's affected our games at the club. We can't meet together, but this month we're actually having a tournament of serious games, slow games, online using chess.com. And I'll be bringing you the first round action from that, in which I played Mike Meehan. But before I do, I wanted to give you the brief astronomy segment. And I have something a little different this week. Instead of talking about a topic of physics or astronomy or something like I normally talk about, I wanted to tell you about a person that I met who's a really remarkable person, I think. And this is Story Musgrave. You may or may not have heard of him. He's an astronaut. And I first heard about him back in the 70s when I read a book called The Making of an Ex-Astronaut by Brian O'Leary. It was the story of a guy who dropped out of the astronaut program and why he did. But in it, he talked about this other astronaut called Story Musgrave, who he thought was pretty remarkable at the time and who could just seemingly get anything done. In fact, he called it a Musgrave maneuver whenever he did his machinations to achieve some goal. And, I didn't think too much about it, but as the years went on, I heard a bit more about him. And I finally got a chance to meet him some years ago. And what's interesting about Story is that he's accomplished more than, probably 5 people would in a normal lifetime. He was born and went to high school, actually, in Massachusetts, dropped out of high school, but was in the Air Force in the Korean War on an aircraft carrier, although just as part of the flight crew, not actually flying. And he got out and got a math degree, a BS in math from Syracuse. So far it's all normal. Got an MBA from UCLA. Well, that's fine too. And then he got another BA in chemistry from Marietta College. And then he went on to get his MD at Columbia and became a doctor, a surgeon. And he practiced for a few years and joined the astronaut program. And then while he was in training, he picked up a master's degree in biophysics from the University of Kentucky and a master's in literature from the University of Houston. So that's 6 different degrees. Pretty remarkable, I think. And he became a shuttle astronaut and had a very successful career as a shuttle astronaut. He's the only astronaut out of all of them that flew on all 5 shuttles. He flew on the very first Challenger mission and flew again on the Challenger mission shortly before the one in which it exploded. And he was the guy that did the Hubble repair mission when Hubble Space Telescope went up and it was out of focus and they needed to go up and put in some more optics to correct that so that it would make good images back in the mid-'80s. He was the guy that spearheaded that mission. So he's had quite an interesting career at NASA. And while he was doing that, he had gotten very interested in aviation. He got over 17,000 hours of flight time in 160 different kinds of aircraft. And he got into parachuting. He had over 800 free falls. And along the way picked up a FAA rating for an instructor, for an instrument instructor, for a glider instructor, for airline transport pilot, as well as his U.S. Air Force wings. Has a number of hobbies, chess, and flying, of course, gardening, literary criticism, poetry, microcomputers, parachuting, photography, reading, running, scuba diving, and soaring. And somewhere along the line, he found time to have 6 children. I imagine his wife did quite a bit of the raising. He wrote a poetry book. That was mostly poems that he wrote to go along with some images he took from space. And he even told me when we were talking at Haystack that he had a business, a pine tree farm down in Florida that he was operating. Anyhow, you can see some of these pictures that were taken when he came to visit Haystack. I was lucky enough to be asked to give him the tour around the radio astronomy and VLBI section of the observatory. And I got to talk to him for about 20 minutes or so. And I found him to be a very good listener. He would sit there and just kind of stare off into space or maybe stare at you, but anyhow, very concentrated and would listen to what you said and then ask some really pertinent questions. And he was happy to hear my opinions about the astronaut program and what should be done and so on. So, I've met probably a half dozen or a little more astronauts during the course of my life, including some that are, reasonably well known. But I think Story was the most remarkable of the various astronauts that I've met. And so I thought I'd share that with you today. Well, let's go on to the chess. Right, so this is my game that I played against Mike. As I said, we played it online, and the time control for this game was 75 minutes for the game plus a 5-second increment. So slightly faster than our usual, take the headphones off here, slightly faster than our usual time control, but still pretty slow and very leisurely for a online game. And in it, I played e4. Mike responded with d5, which is the Scandinavian, the Scandi. And so I like to play against this as white because it's fun chasing black's queen around. So the idea is to take, and then when he takes back, attack it with your knight, of course. After queen takes and knight out, then his queen has to move. He didn't do that. Instead, after I took, he just attacked my pawn a second time. Now, I've had people do this before, and what I've done in the past, and I did on Monday, was to go ahead and support that pawn and to make it hard for him to get it back. Now, I can't really hold on to it, but I can make it difficult I can't hold on to it without totally ruining my position, but I can make it hard for him to recover the pawn. And usually, I think what people have done in the past is to play c6 to try to recover the pawn. And that can lead to basically to a pan-off variation of the Caro-Can, which I'm happy with as white. He didn't do that, though. He went a different way. He played e6. And I treated it the same way as white, and that is to let him go ahead and make the exchange. I could play pawn takes, bishop takes now, like so, and I would have temporarily won a pawn, but he would have gotten lots of compensation. So I didn't like this position at all. I don't know what the judgment is of the computer. The computer says it's fine for white. So, if I knew what I was doing, I could probably go ahead and do that. I chose not to. I instead played d4 and let him regain the pawn immediately. And what I did then was to support my d-pawn with my knight. Rather than, it sort of looks like a more natural move. Instead of knight f3, it would have been knight c3. Just sort of shoring up the exposed king position. So, my king here can be attacked along this diagonal. And having a knight on c3 in these kinds of situations is nice. But I wasn't worried about the immediate threat. And you'll sort of see why, I guess. So instead, I went ahead and protected my d-pawn, which can come under fire after he trades off his d-pawn for the c-pawn, and he can be attacking along the d-file. So I played knight f3, and he immediately took on c4, which made it look a little bit like a queen's gambit accepted. But it's what this really is an exchange French. If we go back to the very beginning, if black plays pawn takes, black plays e6 as a French, and then we follow the normal line, but if white exchanges pawns and gets into an exchange French like this, and we both develop the knights, and I played c4, then we've gotten to exactly the same position that we have in the game, except by a different move order. So that's why it's an exchange French. But then he decided to go ahead and keep going further, and it gives it some of the characteristics of a queen's gambit accepted, but of course it isn't because the e-pawns have been traded. I went ahead and recaptured, developing my bishop. He checked me, but of course I can develop the knight. And now, before I went into this line, I had to look at the possibility that he would immediately attack my knight again, which he did. And I decided that this wasn't good. And I think, this is the source of pretty much all of his problems. It's a short game, and things go pretty well downhill from here on. It turns out, a better idea would have been just back in this position would have been to castle first, or to play knight c6, develop the knight. Instead, I have 3 pieces developed, he has 3 pieces developed, things are fine. But instead, after knight e4, he still only has 2 pieces developed, and I'm going to have 4 developed after my move. So, white's got too much of a lead in development here, and black's king is in the center. And so it's pretty risky for black. And what I did is I found a combination involving a sham sacrifice of the bishop on f7 check. The best move actually here, according to Stockfish, is king f8. Not even accepting it, because the king just gets into trouble coming out, even though it looks like this would be worse because it keeps the rook hemmed in. But as you'll see, accepting the bishop is even worse than that. So, sorry, let me go backward. Bishop takes, he took with the king on f7. And the idea now is I can come out with my queen check, and I'm going to pick off this bishop on b4. By the way, notice that a few moves back, before after he first played the bishop, and in this position here, there was no chance of winning this loose bishop with a check, because he could simply go ahead and play knight to c6, which would have supported it and also blocked the check. So instead, I went down this line. I did the sham sacrifice. I took with the king, and then he blocked with the bishop. Once again, he's better off not coming out with the king, or not coming out with that bishop, but moving the king back to f8. And the reason is because I have a little Zwischenzug here, knight to e5 check, and he has a choice now of going ahead and going to that back rank, with me even having a stronger position. So if he goes to f8 now, I'm going to take his bishop on b4 here with check. Right? So he doesn't really want to be on f8, and he doesn't really want to come out further with his king, so he doesn't have any real nice alternatives. What he chose to do was to come out with the king. And so I have to go ahead and maintain my material lead here. I took on b4. And he traded off his good knight in the center from my knight on c3. And here I made a mistake. And it was one that I made after a lot of careful consideration. I evaluated either taking with the pawn or the queen, obviously, and thought that, taking with the queen would be nice, because the queen would then have this third rank to come over to either maybe check, or to come over to g3 to attack that weak pawn. There's various possibilities depending on what black does. But I didn't do that. And the reason I didn't do it, well, there were 2 reasons. One was because I liked supporting my d-pawn so that I wouldn't have to worry about it, although that's not really the important thing for white right now. I mean, it's a dynamic advantage. I don't want to be worrying about static factors like pawn structure. I really want to be going after this, pressing the advantage while I have it. But the other thing, the other reason that I made this move is it was sort of a trappy reason. I was looking at a possible combination, and the combination involves coming out with the bishop here, checking the king, and if the king moves, winning his queen. If the king captures the bishop, then forking the king and queen on this f7 square with my knight. But the problem is, right now that f7 square is controlled by the bishop, and I was looking for some way to lure the bishop away so that I could make that combination work. And I figured if I played queen takes b4, that maybe he'd go ahead and move his bishop to support this pawn on b7 that I just attacked, and meanwhile attack my king side, attack that loose pawn on g2. So I figured this would be a tempting move for him, and in fact he made it. But of course, as soon as he made it, I said, well, wait a second, doesn't help me at all because my combination doesn't work. If I were to go ahead and go down that line now with bishop g5, he can go ahead and take it with his king. And when I fork his king and queen, he just takes it anyhow. He's still on the same diagonal. So it was a little bit of fuzzy thinking on my part. So, of course, fortunately, by the time I got here, I realized that that was not the right way to go. And I castled in this position. You know, sometimes castling is a quiet move, but in these sorts of positions where white has very open lines in the center and the king is exposed, castling can be a really dangerous move for black, just because it gets the rook into play so quickly. Okay, the problem with what I did is that now this does allow his knight to come out and possibly to exchange off my knight, but I didn't really think that was an issue. I can avoid the exchange right now by playing my knight to g4 check, and after his king moves, I can move my queen to safety. If his king were to attack my knight, you know, trying to win a tempo here, I could come back check like so, and his king would have to move, and then my queen could go to some safe square. So I could avoid the trade of my knight, but when I looked at the position for a while, I realized that he couldn't really afford to exchange off knights. So instead, I just moved my queen to what I felt was a reasonable square. It's safe here. Also, I'm thinking about coming back to d1, and where I can reach the squares on the king side here with my queen. And I didn't think he could afford to take my knight, although he did choose to take it. But that causes problems, as you'll see, because I just take back with the pawn, and now his king has another decision to make, and it's opened up this fourth rank for my queen to come across. So he really can't afford to play king takes pawn. Instead he played king f7, but that allows me to check him along the file. And I was thinking at this point that he would probably be forced really to tuck the king away on g8 and entomb his rook, where it's hard to develop the rook. He obviously didn't want to do that, so he came out with a king, and I looked at it for a little while and realized that, well, I could force him to go to the back rank with a check. He comes back, and now I come to f5 check. And, well, I suppose he could have gone to e7, but of course that would lose his queen to a skewer with the bishop. He chose to go to e8. Computer likes g8 better. E8 is, still a very exposed position for the king, and it allows it looks like it would allow the rook to come out, but it doesn't, because I play bishop to a3, and that now controls this f8 square so that he can't use it for his rook. The computer actually in this position doesn't like bishop a3. Instead, it likes the move that I made on my 19th move, on my 20th move, my next move. But this is not a bad move. It really restricts his possibilities. And he played queen to c8. There's really nothing terribly good, but this is, worse than some of the possibilities, but it's totally lost at this point. There's really not that much to do. So I went ahead and played the move that the computer wanted me to make, even a move earlier, e6. It's threatening checkmate if he doesn't, if he did something like retreat this bishop that's being attacked. I could check, and king comes over, and I have a simple mate here on e7. So it's threatening mate, and what he did didn't help. He brought his queen back to d8, and that just made it mate and 1 instead of mate and 2. So, it was probably not a fun game for Mike, but fortunately it was over nice and quick, so you guys don't have to listen to me ramble for a big long video. I hope you enjoyed it. It's always fun to look at these little miniature games where the pieces are unfettered and flying around the board. And so stay safe until next week. This is Roger Capello from My Week at the Club. So long.